if you are leading something, if you are running something, if you want to go do your own thing, like you get all the reward, but you also take on all the risk.
Right.
And there have been moments in this, 15-year journey that have been like absolutely devastating. And there have been moments where like I've been on the top of the world. And that's kind of the reality when you are the boss.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of A Higher Purpose, a Vanderbloemen podcast. I have a new Vanderbloemen quarter zip, and this is an exciting episode. We are joined once again with Sarah Gonzalez.
Yeah, dab me up. Yes, we're back.
Go.
We're back.
And I'll just say, I am so stoked. We have a really awesome guest this week.
We do.
I think we say that every week, but like, for real.
This guy's like above our pay grade, though. He's cool. He's really cool.
He said yes, and we were like, he said
We
yes.
said what?
But this is Brady Shearer. You've probably seen him on Instagram or TikTok or listening to his podcasts. But he's the real deal, frontline entrepreneur, helping churches, all things tech, trends. So should we dive in?
Let's go.
Let's do it. Okay, Brady, I will say people have probably seen you on Instagram,
For sure.
TikTok, YouTube, your podcast. You're everywhere, man. And so some people might know bits and pieces of your story, or maybe someone's listening going, that's a cool guy on the podcast, but I'm not familiar with you. And so I'd love just to start with just hearing a little bit about your journey.
Yeah.
And honestly, don't feel like you have to give us the SparkNote version. I think there's a lot of lessons learned in the midst of a story that's really helpful for our listeners.
Yeah, sure thing. So I grew up in a rural Baptist church. I'm Canadian. This was about an hour north of Toronto, the big city. And there was like 12 of us in this church. We didn't have any tech, so that means pastor didn't have a microphone. He would just preach from a wooden pulpit. We would sit in our wooden pews and listen. There was one acoustic guitar. There was two acoustic guitars when days got a little bit crazy. The Baptists embraced their charismatic side just for a moment. We did have a overhead projector though. So like when Days of Elijah would hit the bridge, that's when we would like, grab it, flip it over. And growing up there, I would find myself like really eager to get home to just like turn on some football. I think my parents kind of sensed that they, were exposing me to the type of like faith experience that as a young child, it was going to be relevant to at all. So they kind of start pushing me to go to a youth group. And there was this one in town, and they were a Pentecostal church. So not really connected to my upbringing, but in Canada, we have these big like winter retreats. So we go up to like cottage country up north, really snowy. You lock yourself in a cabin and you just do like worship. And worship to me was like a brand new experience because I get to this church and there's like students my age, which was new. And then they had like this PA system, and there was a drummer, and there were these guitarists that were plugging into amplifiers. It was very novel. And I remember having this like emotional experience, and I was like, wow, that's brand new for me. And faith very quickly became something I was extremely passionate about. And going to youth group was really special because growing up, I really loved athletics and I played a ton of sports, but I really excelled in academics as well. In 8th grade, like I won the award for best athlete and like best grades. And like I never really like fit in with either because I kind of had both. And I wasn't really feeling like I ever had a place to fit in. And then I get to church, this new youth group, and like they accept me for who I am, all my eccentricities as a teenager trying to figure out his way in life. And I just remember being like, this is the coolest thing ever. So, school would end on Friday. I'd walk miles to get to church along the country road just so we could like set up for youth on Friday night. And then the natural extension of that became, well, I mean, my youth pastor and this youth group have been so impactful on me. Like, I'd love to do that for the next generation. So my girlfriend and I, now my wife, we moved across the country to go to Bible college to pursue that. So I was in the youth ministry track, which after 4 years would give me my degree in youth ministry and theology, which I have. But a couple of years into that, I started to kind of get the feeling that I don't know if I'm really cut out to be like the youth pastor of an actual church. I had done an internship in my first year, and I was kind of shadowing a youth pastor and just seeing like how much time he was dedicating, and he was bivocational, to students and going to their soccer games and showing up for them and answering their texts and like being there for them when like, relationship struggles were happening. And I was like, all these kids deserve that. I don't know if I can give that to them
Yeah.
and not compromise or sacrifice my family life, my personal health. Like something is going to die on the altar of ministry because I'll probably not be able to not show up for these kids. And the word that I like to use now in hindsight is like, I just realized that I didn't have the relational bandwidth for it. It wasn't a perfect fit for my skill set. The problem was is that I only ever wanted to work with church. That's all I ever wanted. So in my second year, I get invited to this new church plant, and they're like, hey, stakes are low here, but the pastor, I guess he saw something in me. He's like, here's a camera. We'd love for you to be our media director. Go and show us what you can do.
Wow.
So in the same way I would take to athletics as a kid or academia, or, I had a brief stint where I was into DJing, whatever it is, like I just go all in on something.
I have some follow-up questions on that, but yeah.
Well, we don't have to circle back. That's probably best left in the annals of history. So I take to this camera and I'm like, okay, let's go out and do it. So my roommate at the time, who would become the first ever employee at our company, we go out to the intersection by the Bible college and we set up the camera. Now, it's important to know that I didn't have a tripod. So setting up the camera just meant putting it on this like green electrical box so that it had some stability and was like not on the sidewalk. So we start taking photos, and Mitch, our first employee, my roommate, he goes like, what are you going to do with these photos? Like, oh, I'm going to stitch it together and make a time lapse. Because I had this vision for this like kickoff video, and it was inspired by this other vision video that the City Church in Seattle had done, Today Church Home. And it was, the beginning of the video had what's called this tilt shift time lapse effect, where there's no motion blur in the time lapse whatsoever, and the edges of the frame have this blur. And what it does is it gives the effect that all of, let's say, the cars in a time lapse are like these little miniatures. It's very cool. And that was what I wanted to replicate. So I'm just like, I'll take photos and, the computer will do it. I don't know. No clue. Anyway, within a couple of minutes, I hear a guy behind me and he goes, hey, son, what are you doing? And I turn around and it's a police officer. And he's asking us questions because this is 2010. Like, people aren't taking videos or photos in public, especially with like a camera, like a Canon T3i that I had. And so he basically is like, I don't know what you're doing, but it seems wrong. So go home. And I was like, okay. And, it was a Canadian police officer. He was very kind, but it was still like, enough of this, go home. And so I was pretty embarrassed by that. I was like shaken up. I was like, oh my goodness, like the authorities. But a couple days go past and I think to myself, you know what? Like, I can do this. Surely the people that made the video in the States, it's not illegal. So I just need to go to places where I'm a little bit less out of public view. So we go and do that. We make the video. It's this great success. And my pastor's like, wow, I did not expect this. And that was really like the catalyst to me feeling like, okay, if I figured out this first challenge, and it took a while, like I had no idea how to take a single image and then stitch it together to make a second of footage. We made a time lapse. It looked ugly. It looked nothing like the City Church tilt shift time lapse. So I was like, oh, okay, I have to learn to blur the frames. Oh, okay, it's motion blur in the like, you're picking up all these things. And that was like what I came to realize, like that's everything in creative ministry, any creative pursuit. It's just constantly solving challenges. And maybe there's a YouTube video about it in 2010. There wasn't. So you'd read forums and just try to stitch together information to make it happen. But once I got that first bit of feedback, like, hey, you solved this challenge, then the next one came and I was like, great, let's solve that. And, here we are 15 years later.
Wow. That's crazy. That's crazy. So you got handed a camera, got this huge opportunity, and then kind of tell us a little bit about since that, now in the past 15 years, talk a little bit about what you've created.
Yeah. So I started making these videos at our church and then they would get shown and other churches started reaching out and saying, hey, can you make this video for us? And I would go back to Bible college. I'm in third year, I'm in fourth year now. And I'm looking at my peers and they're going to go on to become youth pastors and worship pastors and lead pastors in small rural towns of Canada. And I can see, they're going to be asked the same thing that I was asked, which is like, hey, you're young. Can you do this? And so I'm like, if I can do these things, anyone can. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to start a blog because that was how you published information and shared it with the world then. And so prochurchtools.com became this blog. And I started publishing everything that I was learning. And I started a YouTube channel in, 2011. And we started a podcast. And we just started teaching everything that we were learning. And, hey, someone will find value in this. And then people did, because you would Google and how do you start a Facebook page for a church?
That's
like no one had written about that, but I had written a blog post and they found me.
Yeah.
And then I kind of got really, really into the idea of running a business online because it seemed to be like the intersection of my skills. Because as much as I like spending time with people, it doesn't recharge my battery. what I love to do is like tinker in the lab. Like I love to write and I love to like work on my creative pursuits. And then I like to do that again the next day. And so what online business allowed me to do is basically take what I'm good at and eliminate what I'm bad at. Like I'm not great at networking. It doesn't come naturally to me. But when you publish to the world, you can publish like one post and then 10,000 people can read it.
Right.
Or even at the beginning, 122 people can read it. And suddenly 122 people trust you a little bit more than they did before they met you. And then maybe they join your email list. And basically this began the process of building an audience, which became building a company. Like I said, I hired my, roommate. He became our first employee. Today we're a team of 30 plus. We've got a stateside location. We've got our Canadian location. We run software products. We have agency products. But the one constant from the very beginning is like we still just keep publishing what we're learning.
That's so good.
I love that.
Do you have like a video or a blog post that you look back and say, that's when like the concept became a reality, where you just go, oh, that was like the moment. Like I thought I could do it, but now it's happening.
I mean, I remember when, and we were about like 6 months into the business, which at this time was not officially a business. It was a sole proprietorship. It was just like my name and a website with WordPress. And my wife was working 2 jobs. So I was in school still full time. She had a 1-year certificate program. So she finished it. We got married in between 2nd and 3rd year. So this is like 3rd year. We're like newly married. And she would go to work insurance 9 to 5, and then she'd go work retail in the evenings.
Oh, wow.
And I would go to school, but aside from that, I would sit in my bathrobe and like tinker with WordPress plugins to try to make like my site work. And this poor woman would come home and she'd be like, "Oh, like you're where I left you." I'd be like, "Yeah, but babe, you wouldn't believe it. Now the plugin works. Remember it bricked the site? Now it's working again." And she's like, "Score." Anyway, see ya. I got to go to my next job. And I remember that summer, I was kind of working odd jobs here and there, still like working around the city, helping make videos for churches and ministries that needed it. And I remember like praying and I was like, "Hey God, like we have this new product and it's video announcements for churches."
Wow.
And what, churches will send me their script and then I'll memorize it and I'll set up this collapsible green screen in my apartment and I'll stand in front of it, no teleprompter. I'll memorize the entire script. I'll present it, edit it for the church, and then I'll send them back their video announcements. And it was $300 a month, and I would do it for you every single week.
Wow.
And I was like, I'm making $1,200 a month as a media director at this church, which I just want to say was like the coolest thing ever to me, to make money at church in media.
Doing what you
But
love.
once we got married and the bills, it wasn't like a huge option for me. And more importantly, I wanted to do this online business thing. That's what I wanted. And so I remember I was like, "Lord, I only need 4 churches. That's all I need." And I remember the first church that ever signed up. It was a church from Tampa Bay, Florida. And like I got an email and it was like $299 paid, new user. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, a person on the internet paid me money." And so I like get really excited and I call my mom because my wife was at work. So I call my mom, like, "Mom," because she would like copy edit all of my writing because it was bad. So we were pretty like, in it together. I was like, "Mom, like someone signed up. I told you, you said no one would pay money online, but they did." And she's like, "I'm so proud of you, honey. Like, great job." And then like an hour later, I get an email from this church and they say, I think like your product was not what we expected. We need a refund."
Oh, no.
And I remember it was like the most devastating moment. And I got the email while I was at the church office. And I remember my church office, like my desk was in like this open second sanctuary. So there was no privacy. So like if you had someone come in at that time, you would have just seen me like weeping in the corner.
Oh.
No.
Like just so sad.
With a bathrobe?
So I remember praying.
Yeah, in the bathrobe.
bathrobe stuff,
Luckily I got dressed that day. So it could have been worse. So later that summer, I remember saying this prayer, like, "Lord, we just need 4 churches to sign up." And nothing was happening. And then, I remember the first church that signed up and stayed, and they're still a customer to this day in a different product of ours because we no longer make video announcements. But they've been a customer for 15 years.
Wow.
Was another Florida church from Jacksonville. And that's why Northern Floridians will always be, to me, superior to Central Floridians because the Central Floridians did me real dirty. Jokes aside, within a couple of months, we had 4 churches sign up.
Wow.
And so suddenly my $1,200 per month income at church had been replaced by these 4 video announcements churches. And again, like in the same way that the first video I made, it creates this feedback loop where you start to believe in yourself because you're like, I did this thing and it worked.
Yeah.
I could do the next thing and it works. Suddenly, like if I made like $1,200 online, why couldn't I make money to replace my wife's full-time job and then her part-time job? And then maybe we could build a business. Maybe we'd have to hire an employee and then I wouldn't have to do every single thing in the company. And then it just kind of, snowballed from there.
Wow.
And I love kind of hearing bits and pieces of your story because I think there's a lot of young people and probably from generations past, it's not everyone's geared towards being an entrepreneur, but like maybe they get told by the police early on, hey, maybe turn off the camera and go do something else. And maybe that's the end of the story.
Right.
But you said, man, I got this in me and I have this passion. And maybe someone early on, maybe they go back and they start recording some stuff with the camera. They get the rejection email and that's when they fold it up.
Right.
And I think young listeners realizing that you didn't get the platform overnight,
right?
But it is the importance of continuing on, what the Lord's placed on your heart. And there's hearing the stories of, man, I fell off the bike, but I got back up. I think that's really important for young listeners to hear because we live in such the soundbite generation now of like, oh, well, if I just have one soundbite get millions of views, then I'll make it, I'll go viral.
Yeah.
But it's like hearing of stuff of 2010, 2011,
right.
And what the Lord already was placing on your heart early on, the tools added to your tool belt, I think is going to be really good for listeners.
Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely. I would love to hear a little bit more about kind of that fear of failure, that we talk about that a lot on the podcast of these are maybe younger generation right out of college, or maybe you've been in a career for a little bit, but you have this desire to maybe start your own business or whatever that looks like. Talk a little bit about how do you overcome that as a leader, pursuing new projects, things like that? How do you overcome, what if I can't do this? You got that $300 deposit and then they were like, wait, just kidding, we don't. How do you overcome in those moments of, can I really do this? With small things or big things. I'm sure today, even though you've grown this giant organization, there's still maybe some projects that you're like, can I do this? Can I take this on? How do you kind of take that leap of faith in those moments? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, the phrase that we use internally, one of the codified values we have at our company is calculated delusion. And
I love that. I love that.
And the definition there is like, if the worst were to happen, is it still survivable? And usually that's kind of like the limit that we'll push. So what that does is it fosters and it develops like grit in us.
Yeah.
Because the reality is that maybe someone's listening to this and they are like a prodigious talent in this respect, but virtually no one is born with the ability to just like believe that they can overcome things unless they are like fully delusional. And then the world, I'm sure, will quickly tell them that that's not accurate.
Right.
And so like, it's actually a skill that you develop. So if you recognize in yourself that you don't have it yet, that should not be interpreted as a negative to your future or to your ability to see this through. It's really just a recognition of like, okay, this is where you are right now.
Yeah.
One of my friends, Sean, he always says in terms of like creatives, he's like, your first videos are your worst videos. It's the same idea there, which is like, you don't ever start as a polished, finished project. You kind of have to suck to then like come out of that.
Yeah.
And recognizing that, I think then it kind of like removes some of the pretense and suddenly you can like remove some of the expectations that you have on yourself. And the great thing about digital ministry, digital as it is right now, is that you are afforded the luxury of experimenting with very low stakes.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, tremendous upside and at no cost. So you can basically start a TikTok, start an Instagram, use your phone, learn to talk to your phone, and basically publish. And sure, I guess maybe your friends would see and find that a bit embarrassing. But aside from that, like if you failed miserably over 6 months, all that you would have done is wasted some of your time, which the younger you are, usually the more time that you have as a luxury. And you wouldn't have had to like spend money. Back in the day, it's like, okay, I'm going to build this idea. Someone give me, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to go build it. And if it fails, yikes, like the fallout is rough.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. And, we're a lot of the time we find ourselves in the church space, interacting with different sized churches, nonprofits. And we hear it, not all the time, but often of someone coming in, church is saying, we want a creative. But we were saying this offline, but you have to play in this sandbox. And that can be really frustrating for some creatives. What would you give advice to maybe like a young person that's a creative, maybe they're in communications or tech or something in that space, stepping into a role? Are there any like, listen for this, or how do you lead from the second chair, the third chair, give feedback, but do the dance with different generations that say, hey, we want this, but maybe not at the pace that you're wanting to go in? Like, how do you do that dance? What advice would you give young leaders?
Well, I mean, I'm very familiar with that because when I started Pro Church Tools and I was like, hey, start a Facebook page, I had to spend like 8 years talking to churches about like, why would you even go on social media to begin with?
Right.
Yeah.
I remember talking with people my age and then, the generation that was coming up behind. And I would say like, it's going to be a really interesting time when we don't have to even have conversations about should our church be on social anymore. And, when I open up my Instagram feed and I swipe through like the Reels tab, I am always like so blessed with what I see because I see churches just expressing creativity at the intersection of like faith and culture in ways that makes me so happy because it would have been like pulling teeth trying to get some of these posts approved back in the day. I remember trying to do anything that was like lighthearted, for instance. And they're like, well, church, that's not really the place for that. And now like, my entire Instagram Reels feed is just like churches like being peak comedic, like just hilarious
Yeah.
in every way. And so like a part of it is recognizing like where you are in the changing tide. The tagline that we frequently repeat at our company is, hey, we're here to help your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. Like the time we didn't choose when to be born, but like the time that we're living through right now is incredibly turbulent in the best and most tricky ways.
Yeah.
And so what that means is like, we have to have a certain level of sympathy for generations that were not born when we were and their desire to fulfill the mission of the church, but their inability to speak the language that you're speaking. So you have to speak the same language to help them grasp and put trust in you that you have the same motivation that they do at heart. So it's your responsibility in second chair, third chair, to first fully articulate the mission of the church and be able to anchor anything that you're proposing to that mission, to demonstrate to your senior leader that, hey, I see that this is the vision that you have for the church, and I'm here to champion that. And one of the ways that I think we can see this mission come to fruition is through this project. And then you propose that project. And then the more that you can do to limit or ideally fully eliminate the burden on this senior leader in respect to their time, the budget that they set out,
Right.
and their volunteers to basically say, hey, I can fulfill this like virtually on my own at no cost. I just kind of need you to say the A-OK. That was the process that my kind of OG pastor taught me, and I continue to teach to this day, because it is quite dramatic what can be done when you basically just like posture yourself on the same team as the senior leader. Because at the end of the day, after most services, what they're used to hearing is, hey, pastor, I think our church should do this. And the implication there is that my pet project is now your responsibility, pastor. And so they're kind of almost always on their back foot when it comes to these things. And it's tough when you're younger because when you are younger, you are part of the generation that is fully driving creative culture. That's fashion, it's aesthetic, it's music, it's social trends, it's slang. And so basically everything that is familiar to you is what is most popular. And as someone who is entering their mid-30s, as I turn 34 next week, it's very fascinating now to experience the generation coming in behind me because I'm like a really right in the middle millennial. So Gen Z is now coming in and their aesthetic and their internet slang or internet trends and their slang, language, fashion is very different. In fact, a lot of it is in direct response to what my generation used to like. So it's not just different, it's actually opposite. And now I'm being told what you like is inauthentic. What you like is outdated. What you like is cringe. And now it's like, oh, so when I came in as a young person and I was like, this is the style. And when churches said, well, we've always done it this way, I thought we were having one conversation, but we were actually having a different conversation. And so the thing that I'd want to emphasize is to the younger people is like, as much as you can, have sympathy for the older generation. One day you'll have empathy. Right now it can just be sympathy. Hey, we're old and we're not quite fully grasping it.
Yeah.
we do want to empower you and we do believe in you. So if you can articulate the mission, because that's what we're responsible for, and then you can say, hey, here's an idea for fulfilling that mission. Let me go run with it. It's not going to cost too much. It's not going to require too much time, energy, volunteers. That's one of the easiest ways to prove and then actually demonstrate that you're a trustworthy individual. And then once you build that rapport with this in your leader and you've shown that you can time and time again come through, now you can start being a little bit more flexible. You can start saying, okay, can we push the limit a little bit more? And because that relationship and trust is built, they're that much more likely to say yes.
Yeah.
Jackpot.
Yeah. That relational equity, it's so important in a lot of spaces, but I feel like especially in the digital age, to be able to get that relational equity, to be able to bring new ideas and not sound like the crazy person who's just trying to push the new, you know? So a lot of what you said, I really, really loved, and I think is great wisdom and advice. Another question, I kind of want to go back to the beginning of you telling your story a little bit and ask the question, how did you make the leap of faith? You know, you said you and your girlfriend, now wife, moved completely across to be able to pursue degrees in youth ministry and things like that. But when you realized that you wanted to start these blogs and these things, and your wife was working 2 jobs, what made you be like, I'm going to do this? Like, to have the confidence and the faith to be able to step into that, because I think a lot of listeners are in that season. What made you, earlier you talked a little bit about like a healthy delusion in some ways, but really what were the mentorships like? What were the conversations like in that season for you to go out and jump into that?
I remember one of the things that I would do is anytime I got a bit of positive feedback from anyone that was older than me, that had gone before me, is I would write it down in this Evernote that I had. So that when I was feeling down, when I was doubting myself, I would return to that and basically look and say, hey, this is proof, not from me, not from my own deluded ego. This is people seeing on the outside and calling out something in me.
Yeah.
And I remember there was another Canadian who ran like a motion graphics company. He since sold it. But when I came into the space and I was writing and I was publishing, he wrote me and he was like, hey, man, love the work that you're doing. You fit right in. And I remember how important it was for me to hear that. And so I copied it and I wrote it down. I had another professor that said to me, hey, I have a lot of people that come through here and there's something different about you. And I was like, okay, I'm going to copy that and write it down and keep it. And then that was like the fuel on the days that I doubted myself. There's another part that I guess it's so funny, where is the nurture and where is the nature here? Because I saw a lot of early success with my business at a very young age. And so there's a big element to that, which is you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so that's the calculated delusion. Certainly through different times of the business, it's been a lot more on the delusion side and a lot more on the calculated side. And probably the younger that I was, the more deluded it was. And then if something works, well, that only just serves proof for you that you can do it again. And so to me, it becomes fostering sober-minded self-belief, but understanding what your personality is so important. Are you the type of person that is so stubborn that you just always see creative projects through, or whatever it is? It wasn't like it was first a camera to me. Before that, I remember I once got, my uncle came to me. This was it's strange that this even happened. He came to me and he's like, hey, can you paint me this painting? And it was this famous Canadian painting of this mountain. He's like, I want this painting in my house. Can you paint it? And I was like, no. And he's like, I will pay you $300 to paint it. And I was like, that is the most amount of money that has ever existed in the world.
Sold.
And I remember in the almost exact same process of the time-lapse video, I made a first one and it was awful. But I learned why it was awful. And then I made the second one, and I think I was in 7th grade. I remember I gave it to him and he was like, this looks exactly like the painting, and it's still hanging in his house today. I don't think I've ever painted since. But that was my obsession with that project. And I have that type of personality and I apply it to basically everything in my life. A lot of my employees don't have that personality. They have more of a worker bee personality, where I can give them a task and it might be monotonous, it might be repetitive, but they just sit there and they just crank it out over and over again. They clock out, they go home, their life is fulfilled, they're happy. That was Mitch, my first employee. Okay, he got married, he had kids, he comes in at 9, he clocks out at 5, he does his work, he says goodbye, And then he goes home and he likes to like build Legos and spend time with his family. Me, like my brain's like always like going nonstop, nonstop, nonstop. And so I think there is an element to this. I remember asking my mom, I was like, Mom, should I start like a podcast where like I teach people how to do business? Because if I could do it, like everyone could do it. She's like, not everyone could do it. Don't start that podcast. And I was like, okay. So I think there is a component to this that like not everyone is meant to go out and like start a business.
Yeah.
But if what I've just talked about, that like obsessive personality or the stubbornness to see a project through, if that's your personality, then perhaps it does translate well to leading something and creating something from scratch.
And you talk about like as the company grows, you know, and I think some of our listeners, maybe they're entrepreneurial, they're starting something and it's them. And maybe they're in a spot where they can go, hey, add 2 or 3 part-time people.
Yeah.
It seems like culture is really important with your organization, but also finding the right people to sit on the right seat of the bus. You say, hey, you gotta have the like I'll figure it out people, and then you have the worker bees. Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic within the creative sphere? Of making sure, hey, you're more of a worker bee, but we're looking for more of a we'll figure it out. Like, how do you do that dance within the creative space?
Yeah.
I mean, at first, I don't think I was doing it in an elegant way whatsoever. A few of the advantages that I had were when I started the company, I was 23, I was newly married, and I just hired my friends from youth group. So the first 6 employees were all like friends from youth group. So we had known each other for a while. And I was like, look, guys, I'm not qualified and neither are you, but maybe together we can do something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that relational equity existed at the beginning. And I think I've been pretty good at like maintaining every one of those friendships while also still like, running the company and leading it. Like those are still my best friends and we still like do all the things together, except now we're in our 30s and we have kids and mortgages. But now we've also been like doing life together from youth group to now, like that's 20 years.
Right.
And so over time, one of the things that we've had to do is codify values in our company that basically will outline how we choose to behave. Because it doesn't matter how well you know someone, it doesn't matter how much you care for them or how indifferent you are to them. If you work alongside someone, inevitably conflict will come out of that working relationship. So we had to basically define, here's how we are going to tackle conflict. And one of the values is say the quiet part out loud. We found that because we cared about each other so much, we would often like not say how we really felt because we're like, I don't want to jeopardize any type of relationship. And then what we had to like, I guess figure out as a team was if we don't say the quiet part out loud, what we're allowing is bitterness to take root. And what that bitterness will like turn into is eventually resentment. And then that resentment will be like crippling to this organization. And so it's our responsibility to actually say the things that we're feeling and not like push them down. Maybe that's also a bit of the Canadian in us, because I want to be polite. I don't want to like, disrupt anything. No. It's actually the opposite. You're being disruptive by not bringing it up. So that's like one of the values that we've had to codify. And then like, if I'm speaking really honestly here, the other part is that I've always done my very best to pay a very competitive salary. So like all of the executive team that's been here since day one, they get paid a salary that's top 10% of Canadian salaries. And what that does is it affords me a lot of mistakes. Like when you're getting led by a 27-year-old, a 29-year-old, a 31-year-old who like has no idea what he's doing and is just like, oh, where were you today this morning, Brady? I was writing more Instagram posts. Like it's like, okay, there's a little bit, it's like when money is tight at home, you're that much more likely to like lash out at your partner, not because they did anything wrong, but because you're just that much more on edge. And so by paying well, what that allowed us to do is like anytime there was some friction, it wasn't friction that was bubbling over into like these huge fights or whatever, or people quitting. And so like, aside from one person who went to start as a filmmaker and now works like on Netflix films, and then another person that like moved to another country, like everyone's still here. We've had like no turnover ever. And I think that's largely because of the culture we've built, but then also because, compensation is helpful. Like, I think it's a weird thing to talk about, like money, but I think in this case, it has been useful as I've figured out and gotten my feet under me as a leader.
Yeah, I love that. I think more people should talk about it. Okay, kind of, you mentioned a little bit, you're in your 30s now, you got some kids, your wife, and you're running this whole company, and your brain is a brain that doesn't necessarily work 8 to 5. You're always thinking, you're always, what can I do next? You have an idea all the time. How do you maintain the work-life balance is kind of like people hate saying that phrase, but how do you maintain the balance of being the husband, being the father, and then being the business owner and manager? How do you balance all of that?
Yeah. So one of the things is we really emphasize like making moments as a family and as an organization. And so usually that is expressed in the form of travel or in the form of like rituals. So we did our 10th annual Academy Awards party last month. And, there's a trophy that we hand out, and everyone makes their votes and guesses on who will win and who will lose. And then the person with the most right guesses wins. So there's small things like that. But then, we also do yearly retreats that are abroad. So this year we were in Jamaica. So the whole exec team flies down. There's like 23 of us and there's 9 kids under the age of 4 on this trip. It's just like absolute mayhem.
Wow.
And then we get to our staffed villa, and then it's okay, relaxing, and, food's taken care of and cleaning's taken care of. And so there's that. And then, my family and I will go on a lot of trips. And so like, even like in the throes of everyday life, we have these like moments that we're always making, and there's always something else on the horizon. In terms of every day, there are a lot of different measures that I put in place to do my very best to mitigate the fact that like my personality is what it is. One of them is I do almost all of my creative work every morning before people wake up. So this morning I was up at 5, I was done my writing by 8, I took my daughter to school. I do all the cooking in my house. So I'm very involved in that way. It's a nice thing to do with my hands. I am not like, Braid's working on the car or he's fixing something in the house. That stuff doesn't really come naturally to me. So cooking, like doing something with my hands, is my version of like escaping from the internet side.
Yeah.
And then I also work from home every day, but 1 day a week. And so I'm in bed every single day with my wife. I put the kids to bed every single night. I'm cooking dinner every single night. And so like, as much as I'm not always fulfilling my aspirations to be fully present in the moment, I am like always here. And I do think with each year that passes by, I am getting better at being present in the moment.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and I think our last question that we love to ask any guest, it's the piece of the balance, but also as you're more solidified in your work, your industry is always changing. You're always learning things, but there are pieces that you wish maybe you would have learned earlier on. What do you know now that you wish like 23-year-old Brady could have like grasped and feel like you could have been a better leader back then?
Yeah.
Strangely, there are like really 2 big mistakes that I made with the company in hindsight. The first one is when COVID started, we like stopped podcasting. And the one constant that's always existed with the company is like, we've never stopped publishing content. And the podcast was only gone for like a few months. We've been podcasting, I think, for 11 years now.
Wow.
Not quite 1,000 episodes, but we're north of 850 now.
That's amazing.
And there was a brief time in there where we stopped. And I was like, you know what? In hindsight, like I wish we hadn't have stopped.
Mm.
And then the other part was the first accountant that we had was quite bad. And that led to some challenges. And it's funny because today I was thinking about our current accounts. I'm like, man, they are so good. They're just always on the ball. They are just, everything's, just taken care of. And there was a lot of pain that was experienced, when you roll over at night, trying to think of like, how many hundreds of thousands of dollars do I owe the government? And how am I going to like find that money? And I have to run like our 6-figure payroll every single month. Like those are the things that like weigh on you.
Yeah.
Of course, in hindsight, when you get through them, they're also like the things that develop you as a human being.
Right.
And I do think like I was booking a massage for my wife yesterday.
Good man.
And I was trying to do it online at the local spa, and it wasn't working. And I could tell that it was a tech issue. And I knew what was happening. So I was like, well, I'll call. I don't like to call. Like relational bandwidth. I don't want to call. Just let me do it online. But I had to call. And I could tell like, okay, I'm speaking to the owner of this shop. It's a small shop. And I tell her like, yeah, I'm just not letting me book online. And you can tell like she's frazzled because she's like, no, like, why is this not working? And the reality of running your own organization or business or project is like, you have to have the skill set of the practitioner. And then you also have the skill set of the manager. And not a lot, like basically no one has that already. It's hard enough to like be good at taking photos, much less like running a photography business. And there are these formative moments, core memories, where something terrible happens. And like, that's what develops you as a human. But like in the moment, you're like, well, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. And that's one more key that we didn't really touch on in this discussion, but is probably also worth surfacing, is that if you are leading something, if you are running something, if you want to go do your own thing, like, you get all the reward, but you also take on all the risk. And
Right.
there have been moments in this, 15-year journey that have been like absolutely devastating. And there have been moments where like I've been on the top of the world. And that's kind of the reality when you are the boss. And what it means is you are responsible for being able to manage your own emotions through that. And
Yeah.
it's not the responsibility of the people around you, whether that's your family or your employees or your team. They don't deserve to feel like the emotions like coming out of that. That's not what they signed up for. And so I've always tried to maintain a pretty equal focus on both the operational side and the creative side. And that might be personality, it might be something I've nurtured. I can't say for certain, but I enjoy working in the spreadsheets and the projections just as much as I enjoy doing all of my writing.
Yeah.
And having discipline and skill set in both has served the company to this point quite well, I think.
Yeah. I love that. That was a great answer.
Get a good accountant, folks.
Yeah. I was going to say, so the biggest takeaway from the whole episode.
Moral of the story.
Get a good accountant.
That's right.
I love it. I love it.
Well, hey, man, thanks for giving us some of your day. I know there's a lot you're spinning, and hopefully we haven't taken away from you cooking dinner for the family or anything like that. But seriously, thank you. I think this is going to be so helpful for listeners. There's been a lot of pieces along the way where I go, if this was a book, I'd underline that, So thank you, Brady.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Appreciate the invite. It's been a great time.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of A Higher Purpose of Vanderbloemen podcast. I absolutely loved this episode with Brady. We talked about something he called calculated delusion. Go back and listen to it if you don't remember what that was. I think that's an incredible piece of wisdom to kind of lead with. And if you want to listen to our other episodes, you can find us online at ahigherpurposepodcast.com. And you can find us on socials everywhere at A Higher Purpose Podcast. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.